Manager with the Council of State Governments Justice Center. With me today are Randy Turner, Director of the Tarrant County Juvenile Services Department, and Susan Lockwood, Director of Juvenile Education with the Indiana Department of Corrections Division of Youth Services. If you encounter any technical or audio problems during the webinar today, please contact WebEx Technical Support at 1-866-229-3239. You also, I believe, can send a message with the Q&A box, and we will try to assist you that way as well. During the webinar, you will be able to submit questions at any point during the session. You can do this by typing your question into the Q&A panel on the bottom right-hand portion of your screen. We will keep a running list of the content-related questions that we receive, and then we will respond to questions during the last segment at the end of the webinar. We'll do our best to get through as many questions as possible. This webinar is being recorded and will be available online at the National Reentry Resource Center website in just a couple of days. The webinar information or the email, you will be emailed a copy of today's presentation if you have registered for the email as well. So today we're going to be going over a number of different things. We're going to start with talking about tools and checklists that are available for use in assessing your juvenile justice system or your juvenile justice agency. And as part of that discussion, we are lucky to have, again, Randy Turner, who is the Director of Tarrant County Juvenile Services Department in Fort Worth, Texas, and he will be giving an overview of his experience assessing his department using the 4 principles in the white paper report that we're going to be discussing. Next, we're going to talk about how to complete the new online interactive juvenile justice agency checklist. I'm going to take you through that pretty much step by step so you can see how to complete the checklist online. And then we're going to close with talking about using the assessment and assessment results for planning and system improvement. And for that discussion, we are lucky to have Susan Lockwood, who will talk about her experiences taking an early version of a checklist and working through the process to develop an action plan. And then, of course, as time allows, we will be taking questions from you as you have those questions. So briefly, before we begin, I want to make sure everyone knows about the CSG Justice Center. The Justice Center provides practical, nonpartisan advice and evidence-based, consensus-driven strategies to increase public safety and strengthen communities. The Justice Center provides assistance and support for both adult criminal justice and juvenile justice systems. The Justice Center is part of the Council of State Governments, which is the nation's only organization serving all 3 branches of state government, so serving the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. Since 1933, CSG has helped foster the exchange of insights and ideas to help state officials shape public policy. On behalf of the Council of State Governments, the Justice Center works with policymakers at the local, state, and federal levels to improve criminal and juvenile justice systems and policy. Justice Center efforts include providing technical assistance through the National Reentry Resource Center in partnership with the Bureau of Justice Assistance at the U.S. Department of Justice. The National Reentry Resource Center has 4 main objectives as a training and technical assistance provider, which include providing one-stop interactive source of current user-friendly reentry information, identifying and documenting and promoting evidence-based practices, advancing the reentry field through training, distance learning, and knowledge development, and delivering individualized targeted technical assistance to the Second Chance Act grantees. And we are, this webinar is being supported through the NRRC today. The Justice Center, in addition to providing technical assistance through the NRRC, began developing resources for the juvenile justice field beginning in July of 2014. At that time, the Justice Center released 2 foundational documents to the juvenile justice field. The first was the white paper entitled core principles for reducing recidivism and improving other outcomes for youth in the juvenile justice system. This report synthesizes into 4 core principles the research on what works to reduce recidivism and improve outcomes for youth in the juvenile justice system. The report also provides recommendations on how to implement the principles and policies with fidelity. The second document was an issue brief entitled Measuring and Using Juvenile Recidivism Data to Inform Policy, Practice, and Resource Allocation. This document summarized the results of a 50-state survey on the different states' approaches to measuring recidivism rates and provides policymakers and juvenile justice personnel with recommended approaches to improve the measurement, analysis, collection, and reporting and use of recidivism data. The white paper and recidivism brief identified 4 core areas or principles that highlight what works to reduce recidivism and improve other youth outcomes. These principles include basing decisions on validated risk and needs assessments, implementing programs and services shown to reduce recidivism and using data to evaluate the results from those programs, coordinating supervision and services across service systems, and tailoring systems to reflect the developmental needs of youth. Excuse me. In addition to these documents, the Justice Center also conducted an in-depth study of the impact of juvenile justice reforms in Texas. The Closer to Home study, released in January of last year, has implications for all states. The study found that, not surprisingly, youth supervised in the community closer to home had lower rearrest rates than similar youth released from state-run facilities. What was surprising was that even with an influx of funding for community supervision as a result of the reforms, recidivism rates for youth supervised in the community did not improve. The study also looked at specific juvenile probation departments in Texas, comparing expected recidivism rates to the actual recidivism rates. The study found that the adoption and effective implementation of best practices explains some, although not all, of the variation in youth outcomes. The Tarrant County Juvenile Services Department was one of the Texas juvenile probation departments involved in the Closer to Home study. Randy Turner, director of the department, is with us today to talk about how they were able to use the white paper and Closer to Home study to assess their department and identify areas for improvement. Randy started this process prior to the completion of the checklists that we're going to be talking about a little later today, but we really think that Randy did a great job in looking at his department and approaching that assessment using the principles. So I'm going to now pass the baton to Randy so he can tell you about his experience. Randy?
Thank you, Nancy. And again, good afternoon to everyone. Tarrant County Juvenile Services is located in Fort Worth, Texas, and as Nancy mentioned, we were one of the county participants in the Close to Home study and report that quite honestly really was able to more clearly define where some of our weaknesses were and where we could certainly improve systems outcomes for the young people and families that we serve on a day-to-day basis. So with that information, and then with the core principles document that was provided and created through the Council of State Governments, we sat down as a senior management team and really began to look at our systems and take a real hard look at each of the 4 core principles and how we could assess and determine our next steps. So Nancy, if you'll flip to the next slide, this is the first principle as an example of how we tried to really take a look at what we have actually accomplished in some of these areas. We believe our department is trying to stay in front of much of the national research and activity that's taken place over the past few years in the juvenile justice arena. But really gave us an opportunity to see what we have done so far, but then also clearly identify what we needed to continue to do to improve systems and make sure we were doing the most appropriate and certainly the most effective systems and putting those systems in place to support what we were trying to achieve. Again, I do not feel like I need to read this entire document to you. It will not take time to do that. just for a few examples, the first recommendation under this principle that addresses using a validated risk and needs assessment, that we wanted to deal with minimizing the juvenile justice supervision and services for youth who are at a low risk of offending. And you can see there, as part of our accomplishments, under the direction of our courts, we developed a first offender program several years ago that actually allows law enforcement agencies to refer directly into that program versus those young people even come into our system. We utilize some very, I would say, typical activities with victim offender mediation, drug court diversion. We've entered into several collaborations with our local school systems to prevent youth from entering into the juvenile system as much as possible. Certainly, we've done some of the crossover youth initiatives that have been, we've been involved with Georgetown University in developing some of those programs and models, and have established some programs to work with kids early on that have been referred to us and have history with the child welfare system. And certainly one of the things that we're very, very pleased about is that we've increased the percentage of low-risk youth that we have diverted annually from our system, and we're only seeing a very small return on that investment of kids who, once we do divert them, we're actually able to connect them back with community services and programs and keep those kids out of our system. Over on recommendation C, one of the things that we actually struggled through actually for a while was determining what kind of an assessment process we should use. We put together a group of our staff to evaluate and look at some of the prominent assessment tools that were available to the system back in 2007 and 2008. After we went through that process, we selected a tool that we felt like best meets our system needs, and went into implementation back in 2009. We certainly have gone through a significant growing stage utilizing that tool, ensuring that it's being used as expected, validating the tool on our population to ensure that it works in relationship to our specific population in Tarrant County. But as you see through this process, we were able to actually identify what we've accomplished, and then as you see at the bottom of the page, we clearly identified that there's still work that needs to be done. And so we did this on every single one of the principles. Just a few examples of things that we have clearly been moving through with the results, again, from the Closer to Home report. We've taken what we've learned through the evaluation of risk and need and looking at risk and need outcomes, or I should say outcomes based on a youth's risk and needs, and really began to work with our community contractors. As an urban area, we're very fortunate to have multiple contracts with local providers that do a lot of work for us in our local community with both the children and their families. We have retooled a lot of our contract agreements with those agencies, being very specific about looking at outcome data and also looking at outcomes that we know will benefit those young people and families by being involved in a community-based intervention. So taking those kinds of steps have been very helpful by, again, taking a look at the Close to Home research that was provided to us and then laying that against the core principles that helps us clearly identify what we've accomplished thus far, but certainly, again, identifying things that we need to continue to do. Again, I want to mention just under recommendation D, it talks about validated screenings and assessments to identify youth with mental health. I know the MAZE-2 screening instrument has been utilized nationally. We have been involved with that activity for the past several years, actually under direction and mandate from the state of Texas. One of the things we're also very excited about is we became involved with a community-wide initiative called Reaching Teams, and we're actually working with numerous other community agencies throughout our county in utilizing an intervention concept and process for how we focus on the positive aspects of youth versus always taking that negative approach that typically is seen in juvenile justice systems. So I will stop there. Again, just as a tool itself, we found this white paper clearly identifying the core principles extremely useful and helpful to us. As we finished up this particular document, we've actually taken the continued work to be done and have actually taken those steps even further and broken those out into many more specific tasks that we've divided up amongst our senior leadership team, and they are now working with staff at all levels of the organization to ensure that that work is being accomplished and being achieved over the course of the past few months, and that's certainly a part of our work for the next couple of years. So thank you very much, and as Nancy mentioned, certainly trying to answer questions later in the session.
Okay, thank you, Randy, and again, thank you for just describing the process that you took and how you brought your staff together to highlight, looking at what research says works, looking at what you accomplished, but also what other steps needed to be accomplished, and how you are taking steps to keep moving your department toward improving outcomes for youth. I think we all think that's really great. And as mentioned earlier, Tarrant County did their assessment prior to the finalization of the checklist resources that we're going to be talking about a little bit more in depth right now, and was able to use the white paper and the core principles. What we've done is take the information from the white paper and the core principles, also from the Justice Center work with states through the NRRC, and also there was pilot testing that was done last year on those 4 core principles and creating checklists. And what came of all that work was the development of 3 different checklists. These checklists are designed to help state and local officials assess whether their agency or juvenile justice system policy and practices are aligned with what research has shown works to reduce recidivism. As I mentioned, there are 3 checklists, and they are directed at specific users, including judges, policymakers, and juvenile justice agency leaders and managers. To access the checklists, the first thing you're going to do is go to the Justice Center website, and that is the actual address is located up here at the top of the screen. And once you're on the website page, you will then click on the youth box. When that happens, it'll take you to the youth page, which looks like that. This is the youth homepage, and you'll see that there's a banner right here, and that banner includes youth home projects, resources, and in the news. If you click on resources, you will see reducing juvenile recidivism interactive checklists, and you're going to want to click on that. And then that will take you to the Reducing Juvenile Recidivism Checklist, Interactive Checklist page. All 3 of the checklists are located on this page or can be accessed through this page. And it begins with, as you can see from the screen, the Juvenile Justice Agency Leaders and Managers Checklist. Now, there are links, there's also the Judges Checklist and Policymakers Checklist are just farther down on the page, so you just scroll down to find those. There are links to print each of these checklists below the headings, and for the Judicial and Policymaker checklists, there are also links to the white paper report. If you are interested in going directly to this page on the website rather than having to click down to find it, the address is right here and will be available to you when this PowerPoint is mailed to you. The judicial checklist, let me say that the judicial and policymaker resources are presented as questions to ask or consider about your system rather than a true checklist. So you can see this is a screenshot of the top part of the judicial checklist, and the title is 10 Key Questions Judges Can Ask to Improve Outcomes for Youth in the Juvenile Justice System. So it's arranged more of questions to ask. The judicial checklist identifies those 10 key questions juvenile court judges should ask to determine whether court practices support improved youth outcomes, and also provides, the checklist provides ways to learn more about the research of what works in particular areas of interest. The link to the actual white paper actually supports the relevant information in the checklist and how that relates back to the white paper. The Policymakers Checklist identifies 3 key steps the policymakers can take to increase public safety, improve youth outcomes, and maximize the efficient use of resources. Policymakers also use this interactive checklist to learn more about the research on what works in particular interest areas. Again, for both the judicial and policymaker checklists, the web page has links to the actual checklist document as well as to areas in the white paper that are relevant to these policymakers and judicial staff. The third checklist is the checklist for juvenile justice agency leaders and managers, and this is more of a true checklist and presents questions addressing each of the 4 core principles. You can print a paper version of the checklist or complete the checklist online. What you're seeing right here now is a screenshot of the first page of the checklist. It's had to be truncated a bit, so these questions do go on for a while, but you can print out this document. We actually encourage that everyone interested in completing the checklist print the paper version first so that you will know the questions and be better prepared to answer them. You might need to have staff with different expertise help in answering the questions, as a single person might not be the right person to answer everything. So by printing out the checklist, you can see what the questions are and get the right people in the room and answer those questions. Also, by completing the checklist on paper, you will give the agency an idea about the areas of improvement that you need to do, but by only completing the checklist on paper, you will not receive a score. So you can use only the paper checklist, and that's fine. You can look at your responses, whether you say always, most of the time, some of the time, or never, and get an idea of those topics or those areas where you could improve, but you will not get an actual score if you use the paper version. The online interactive version of the checklist can be found at the top of the checklist page and allows for the completion of the checklist online. This version will provide scores for each of the 4 core principles, as well as a total score that the agency can use to plan and focus improvements. This is what the icon looks like on the page, and again, yes, that's what the icon looks like on the page. So before you begin the checklist, it's a good idea to have complete knowledge of your agency, agency policy, and agency operation before beginning the checklist. The checklist is organized into 4 sections, one for each of the white paper core principles and subsections for the principles. There are 143 questions, so quite a lot of questions, and some of the questions might not be applicable to your agency. The checklist can be completed by 1 or more staff, but all responses need to be completed on the same computer. Use the checklist as an opportunity to get staff with specific knowledge together to discuss and answer the questions, and when you get your scores, discuss the next steps. You will be able to save your progress on the checklist at the end of each section and come back at a later date to update and continue working on the assessment. Since this is a new tool, we are not able to estimate for you the time it'll take to complete the assessment, but based on testing, I was testing the document before it went live, I would estimate if you're actually using the checklist and reading all the questions on the checklist, that you allow about 45 minutes at least to complete the checklist. Completing the paper version of the checklist and entering the responses you get to get your score would most likely facilitate your process, making it faster. And after you complete the checklist, we would welcome any feedback you have about how long it took you to complete the checklist, and if you thought any of the questions were a little confusing or not very clear. Again, this is the checklist page, and you see this is the icon that you would click on to get to that interactive checklist. You would just be clicking on this blue banner. When you click on that blue banner, you will come to the interactive checklist cover page. This page gives basic information about the checklist and how to respond to the questions. For the best results, we've found that using the checklist and printing the scores, it's best to use Google Chrome if that's possible for you. Other browsers will work. You just might experience a little bit of sluggishness. If at any time you experience difficulties while you're completing the checklist, or if you have questions as you're completing the checklist, my email address is located. Can't see it really very well, but it's right here on that cover page, and feel free to email me with any questions that you might have. At the bottom of that cover page is the start of the checklist, and what it does is it asks you for your name and agency type. Everything here must be completed in order to proceed to the checklist. There is an agency type drop-down box. You can see there's this drop-down box. I put in my information, but it allows you to select for a probation court agency, corrections agency, or a combined agency, probation court and corrections, or if that doesn't really describe your agency, an other agency. We are not going to ever share the information that you provide in this dialog box or as you begin the checklist with others. It is for us to see who is using the checklist, basically the different types of agencies, and also to be able to provide feedback and any assistance that's requested to those that are using the checklist. So once you complete these data elements, then you're going to click on this Save and go to the next section, and that will get you to the actual checklist. So the first page of the checklist begins with Principle 1. You can see here the principle is in dark blue, and there are subsections or within each of the principles that relate to specific questions of the principle. The principles are always going to be at the top of the page and in this dark blue, and then the subsections will always be in this gray underneath. So in this, the very, very first page starts with Principle 1, Base Supervision, Services, and Resource Allocation Decisions on the results of validated risk and needs assessments. And these specific questions are focusing on youth dispositions and supervisions being based primarily on risk of reoffending. So within each of these, there are 5 response options, and you will click on the button that is that represents the most appropriate response. So there are 5 options to each question. They are always yes. So if your agency always has a policy and or practice exists and is always used, then you would select always as your answer. There are some questions that are yes/no questions, and so if your answer to that question is yes, then you would select always yes. If you have a policy or practice that relates to that question and your agency aligns with that 50% of the time or more, then you would select most of the time. You would select some of the time if your policy or practice aligns with that question or with what the statement, less than 50% of the time. No, never, obviously, is for policies, for when policies do not exist or practice is never used. Again, there are those yes-no questions, so you would say no if it is a yes-no question and answer it here. There's also an option for not applicable, and this is to be used when the question does not apply to your agency or the youth that you have jurisdiction over. So for a probation or court agency, there are some questions on the checklist that deal with committed youth and how those youth are assessed and some of the reentry issues. So those questions are not necessarily going to be applicable to a probation agency, so you would choose not applicable. Now, be careful and do not choose not applicable to indicate that a policy doesn't exist or to answer no. You would want to use never or no in that instance. So know that as you're answering questions, you can go back in and change any of your answers and update your answers at any point in time. At the bottom of every page, there is a save and go to the next section bar. You will click on this to save your responses and proceed to the next section of the checklist. All of the questions in a section must be completed. If you skip a question, whether intentionally or unintentionally, and try to save and proceed, this error message will appear, and this message indicates that all questions must be completed in order to save and advance the form, and that there are some questions that haven't been answered. What the form will do is highlight, and you can see this kind of an orangish color. It highlights letting you know which question has been left blank, so you don't have to try to figure that out. It'll help you with that. If you do exit the section without or before you save and proceed to the next section, before you click that blue bar, then your responses will not be saved and your responses will be lost. They won't be available for you. When you click on the Save and go to the next section bar at the bottom of each page, your responses are saved to your computer. This allows you to complete the checklist over time and to keep a copy of the completed checklist automatically on your computer. To access your partially completed or completed checklist, go to the Justice Center website, the Youth page, and the Checklist page, and click on the Interactive Checklist banner again. Information stored on your local browser will populate the form, and you will be able to continue or view your responses. No login is required to save or retrieve your responses. Please note that since the responses to the checklist are saved on your browser, clearing your browser will permanently clear or delete your responses. I've had discussions with our technical people, and they said that unless you are intentionally trying to clear your browser, that it's very, very difficult to actually clear your local browser. So again, it is unlikely that it would happen accidentally, but just it's important to be aware of. Progress through the checklist is displayed on the right side of the page. So this is a screenshot of that first page of the checklist, and you can see over to the right here, it says checklist status. We haven't started completing the checklist yet, so none of these principles are highlighted in any way. But you can see as you move through the form, the status changes, and the sections that have been completed become highlighted in green with a check mark next to it. And you can see that the status bar is changing to indicate that from 1 to 13, 1 of 13 sections was complete, 6 of 13 sections were complete, and 13 sections of 13 were complete. So this way you'll be able to know how far you have gone with the checklist and how far you have to go on the checklist, and know if you need to save your form and come back at a later time, or if you want to try to complete the checklist at that time. Also, be aware that at the bottom of this checklist status is a clear all responses, and that, if you click on that, that really truly will clear all of your responses, and not just in that section, but for the complete checklist, and you will lose all of that as it will be deleted. Even if you come back to the checklist, all your responses will be gone. So just like at the end of the other sections, you will be asked to save the form at the end of Principle 4, Section 4, and this is the very last section of the checklist. Saving the form here completes the checklist and also automatically submits your responses for scoring. Clicking the red bar automatically, this bar here, automatically advances you to the checklist scoring page. Even though you've completed the checklist and your responses are scored, you can go back and update and revise any of your responses at any time. If you do go back and update your responses, you will need to come back to Principle 4, Section 4, and click on this Submit and Save Scoring bar once again to update your scores. When you click on that Save and Submit for Scoring, you will get a score, and this is the screenshot of the first part of the scoring page. And this represents the percentage of total possible points that your agency scored according to your responses. So each of the principles will have a score, and there are subsections, and each of the subsections will also be scored. This circle is a graphic representation of your score. So here, in this test, the agency scored a 58 in Principle 1, but you can see that within the subsections, the first section, they received a score of 54, the second section, a score of 63, and the third section, a score of 58. So by getting information per the different sections, hopefully you will be able to use that information to target the areas you want to address for improvement. Located below all of the scores for each of the principles is suggestions. We've included suggestions on way to improve. These are not tied specifically to your responses, as we're not able to do that at this time. We hope in our version 2 of the checklist that it will actually be tied a little bit closer to your actual responses. But these are color-coded to match the sections in the principle, and hopefully to help you address or find out some of the things that you could possibly be doing to improve those practices. The total checklist score can be found at the bottom of the page below Principle 4 score. So this is at the very bottom of the score sheet. You'll see Principle 4. This gives an indication of what the whole section looks like. So this is, these are your scores up here. This is your overall score for Principle 4. These are the recommendations or suggestions for improvement, and then the total score for the agency or for the entity completing the checklist can be found right here. And this is, of course, for the whole of the checklist, so it takes into consider each of the 4 principles. Below the checklist score, you can view your responses, or you can, will be able to print or save to PDF the score page and your responses. And these, again, these options are located at the very bottom of the scoring page below the total checklist score. Clicking on the View Responses expands that area, and it shows you all of the questions in the checklist and provides your response to those questions. Again, you can print this for your files or, more importantly, for planning purposes. Sharing your responses can ensure that the correct response was selected, and also by sitting down and letting everyone know how the questions were answered, hopefully it'll allow for discussion to begin about what areas to focus on for improvement. To contract the text, all you have to do is click on that View Responses again, and it'll contract. To print the checklist scoring page, at the bottom of the page, again, is the Print or Save to PDF blue button, and if you click on that, what's going to come up is a print document page. If you want to print the score sheet, then of course you're going to just click on that Print button right there, and you'll be able to print the score sheet, and at the back of the score sheet will be the questions and your responses to the question. We recommend that you would also, in addition to printing the score sheet, that you go ahead and save the score sheet to your computer. To do that, you're going to, again, start with the Print or Save to PDF button, and you're going to click on that, and what's going to come up is, again, this print screen, and then what you're going to need to do, it's a little bit not complicated, but it's a little bit not necessarily obvious at first, and it might be slightly different. My computer is a Windows operation. I have a PC that's using a Windows 7, I believe, and so for me, what I do to save to a PDF is right here with the local destination, it says Change, and when I click on that button, it actually will let me change the destination and select the Save to PDF. So what you're going to need to do is change the destination as if you were changing the printer that you're going to be printing from, and then, but instead of choosing a different printer, you're going to choose Save to PDF. And then at that point, you'll be able to save your document by clicking the Save button, and then a box will come up like as if you were saving any document that asks for the name of the file and the location you want the file to be saved. So again, this process may be slightly different depending on your computer. I've been notified as we were developing this, that for the most part, you would be looking at changing the destination. If you have any difficulties at all, then please do not hesitate to contact me. So now you have a score, you've completed the checklist, what next? So use the checklist information to have discussions around areas for agency improvement. Bringing in staff with different perspectives and different expertise will maximize your efforts. Develop a plan to make improvements. This might include short-term goals only or short-term and long-term goals. Get consensus from staff in your agency as well as agency stakeholders in order to ensure a more efficient and effective implementation of your plans. We suggest that you complete the checklist again to track your progress towards your goals. So after you've developed a plan and begin implementation, we suggest that depending on your plans and your goals, that you revisit the checklist, maybe a year out, or if they're short-term goals, maybe 6 months out, 6 months to a year, to see if your scores have changed based on changes to policy and changes to practice. So to talk about the process of using checklists to bring staff and stakeholders together and to identify areas for improvement and develop a system or agency plan, we have Susan Lockwood, Director of Education from the Indiana Department of Corrections, Division of Youth Services. And Susan was, I think, instrumental, from the stories I've heard, in coordinating the Second Chance grant for Indiana and used an early version of the checklist that the NRRC Planning and Implementation Guide it was developed for grantees And Susan and her cohorts used this guide in their planning and reform efforts. So Susan, would you like to tell everybody about your processes?
Sure, thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share some of the work that we did in Indiana. Like Nancy explained, over the past year, Indiana was involved with the OJJDP Juvenile System Reentry Reform Planning Grant. And as we worked through the planning and implementation guide that was developed by the Council of State Governments, we established 3 different regional and statewide reentry task forces. And the members of the task forces provided us with a lot of perspective and insight regarding our processes. But one thing that we decided as we were working through the guide, it really became apparent that the staff members in our leadership positions across our juvenile system really needed to participate in identifying the barriers to reentry along with the strengths that we could use to design interventions to address the barriers. And so our team wanted to do this work in a setting where the staff could focus on reentry, and we wanted to really re-energize the staff around the topic of reentry. So we put together an opportunity for them to meet in one place over an extended period of time, and we called it our Reentry Summit. Now, if you look at the slide, you can see how the staff members that participated in that Reentry Summit, it was our central office executive staff within the Division of Youth Services, our facility superintendents, our facility program directors, our school principals. We had some of our reentry task force members who were present, and then we also have 6 JDAI reintegration specialists who are assigned to various parts of our state, and they participated as well. Next slide. So like I said, with the planning and implementation guide, there were 4 different exercises. Exercise number 3 and exercise number 4 actually became our objectives. Completing those exercises became the objectives for this Reentry Summit. We basically, during the summit, we provided the group with overall context by discussing the objectives of the planning project and the goal of reducing recidivism. And then during one of the initial sessions, we talked about the CSG research that led to the white paper on the 4 core principles for effective reentry and recidivism reduction. And we pointed out that the survey questions that we were going to be using for exercise 3 of the planning and implementation guide were actually aligned to those 4 principles, so they would see how it was all connected. And then we divided our groups into, our participants into 4 groups related to the 4 principles, and we asked them to, each group, to work through the survey questions that were specific to their principle. And after they met in their small groups, there was time for each of the groups to share out to the larger group, and we discussed it. We just discussed all of it as a whole. Next slide. So it's important to note there was a lot of time that was spent discussing the survey questions from exercise 3, but then as we, what was good about it was that we had those questions basically formed a basis for us to brainstorm solutions to the barriers. Each of the groups met separately, generated potential solutions. Later they stated those solutions as short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals. And that became the basis for a comprehensive action plan, and it helped us respond to exercise 4 of our planning and implementation guide. Now, as you would imagine, with 4 different principles and then having solutions for each one of those principles, and for each one of those solutions, there was a short-term and a medium-term and a long-term goal. It was actually a really ambitious plan, that initial action plan. And we also wanted to make sure that we were on track. We had gotten some input from our reentry task forces. Now we had this plan that we had developed as a leadership team. So we actually went a little bit further and went to 2 of our 4 facilities and basically had some focus groups that we were made up of the staff members who really directly worked with the kids and the families on a daily basis. So those would be teachers and counselors and custody staff. And we discussed the questions with them and asked for their perspective regarding the barriers and the strengths, and we used that input to further develop our action plan. So as we continued to work through all of this, we decided that we needed to convene our leadership team one more time, and so we had another reentry summit this past fall, and we used that same format as we did the first time, meeting in one place over an extended period. And basically, the participants reviewed all of the input that was gathered from the facility focus group and the reentry task forces and the comprehensive action plan. And from there, what we tried to do was identify one overarching theme that was related to all of it. And basically, we determined that our overarching theme was a need to increase the family engagement in the reentry process. And so then, by keeping that overarching theme of family engagement in mind, we used the goals from the comprehensive plan, and we basically narrowed the focus into a plan that just had 4 very manageable goals with short-term, medium-term, and long-term objectives. So that's where we are, having started this process basically last April of 2014, and now we're to the point where we have a really focused action plan for improving reentry. It's centered around family engagement and increasing that, and all of the goals are based on an action plan that was developed using the core principles that were grounded in research. So some of our outcomes on the next slide. You can see this was a systematic process. We used the survey questions in the planning and implementation guide. The questions, like I said, were grounded in research, and they were related to the 4 principles outlined by the Council of State Governments. The questions actually allowed us to systematically focus on the important elements that contribute to successful reentry, and they formed the basis for thoughtful and enthusiastic discussion. They provided us with a structure to brainstorm ideas. We were able to develop an action plan for improving our policies and processes. And what was really good about this was that we were able to use the questions across several different audiences. We used them with our task force members, we used them with our facility line staff, and then we also used them with our leadership. And it was really nice to be able to look at all of that input and really make sure that we were all together on what we wanted to accomplish. The questions really helped us assure that our work was grounded in research, and that was very important. So most of all, the other really good piece of all of this was that the use of the questions sparked a renewed focus on reentry. We all came away really re-energized around that, the need to work really hard to make reentry something that was successful for our youth. Again, the renewed focus was apparent across several different audiences, and the recommendations that came from our work were eventually endorsed by Indiana's Commission on the Improvement of the Status of Children, and that commission actually includes agency leaders and staff from our governor's office, and it even includes our Indiana's Supreme Court Justice, or Chief Justice. So one other thing that I think is important to note on our next slide, I talk about some of our lessons learned. It's really important that if you have any kind of a reentry summit like I described, it really needs to have structure, and so what we did was structured the event around the discussion of those critical questions that are now part of this checklist that needs to be reviewed with everyone. We actually assigned the participants to groups so that we had a lot of different perspectives represented across each one of the groups. We found that it's really important that the facilitators are able to stay within the time, because we found that we could easily get talking about things and it could go on, and we really had to keep things time-bound. And then one thing that we found also was that at the time, the survey questions really needed to be discussed, because some of the questions were a little bit difficult to understand. Not everyone knew exactly what was being asked. And so I was really pleased when I was listening to Nancy talk about the different questions on the checklist, and I could see that some of them had been revised so that they were a little more clear. And so I would recommend that if you use the checklist, especially the online versions of those, I think it is very important. I just wanted to emphasize what Nancy suggested, was that as you're doing it, if you find that there are questions that are hard to understand or maybe need to be more clear, that provide that input to them, because they are very responsive and trying to make it so that it's a tool that everyone can use. They definitely have worked really hard to make it something that is going to be a tool that is a user-friendly tool for all of us. So that's my end of, or that's my part of the presentation. I'm really excited that we were able to have the opportunity to share, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Susan, and thank you again for letting us hear about your process. I think it really helps to have concrete examples and advice about how to approach such a kind of what can be kind of an overwhelming process. So as we wrap up today, we would suggest again that the checklists and looking at your agency or improving, trying to improve youth outcomes is more of a continuous process or a process rather than something that you do, one time and then not revisit. So we would suggest that as you begin your assessment phase, you first need to gather that information about your policies and your practices, and wherever possible, use data from your system, not just anecdotal information, but actual data if you have that available to you wherever possible. You're going to want to conduct that assessment using checklists and other available resources that you might have. You're going to want to identify areas for improvement, then develop plans and implement your improvements. Again, this is a continuous process or a continuing process, and it's important to look at your agency and system over time to make sure that youth outcomes are improving and that your services are delivered as you're expecting them to be delivered. So I want to thank you for participating in the webinar today, and I want to say a special thank you to Randy and Susan for taking time out of their day to provide their perspective and their experience with assessing their systems. We will begin the Q&A portion of the webinar. If you've not had a chance to present a question and you have a question that you would like to ask, you can do that now. And again, to do that, you go to the Q&A section at the bottom right-hand portion of your screen. Right now, we have one question that might be the only question that we have. But the question is, where do you print the checklist, or how do you print the checklist? Again, you can, if you are interested in printing the hard copy version of the checklist, you can go to the Justice Center webpage by selecting the youth homepage and then the checklist, and then there will be an option for printing a PDF version of that checklist. If you are actually using the interactive checklist, when you complete the checklist, you will have the scoring sheet again will come up, and provide you with the scores. And at the bottom of that score sheet, you will see a blue bar that says print or save to PDF. And if you click on that blue bar, a print dialog box or a print box will appear, and then all you need to do is click print, and it will print your score sheet as well as the questions for the checklist and all of your agency's responses. So it doesn't look like we have any other questions, which I'm not sure is a good thing or a bad thing, but I guess what I'll say is it's a good thing because you haven't had the opportunity to actually play with the interactive checklist, which I encourage you to do. And if you do have questions at that point, then please do not hesitate to email me or contact me. And if you would like to hear more about how either Randy or Susan was able to get consensus from their staff and actually start doing this planning and identifying practices that needed to be improved or worked on, I'm sure that they both would be more than happy to respond to any questions you might have of them. And again, if you have questions for them, you can, I did not include their emails, I apologize for that, but email me and I will definitely make sure that they get that question. So, oh, we just got a different question, just one second. Okay, so the question is, I had said that multiple people from an agency can be entering the assessment or take the assessment as long as it was on a single computer. And the question was, is there a maximum number of people that can take the assessment? And really, I might have not been really clear about that. If different people, like say in different divisions of your agency, want to complete the entire checklist themselves, anyone can get online and complete the checklist. What I was speaking to is if, as an agency, your numerous staff have different areas of expertise and are taking responsibility for certain principles, kind of like what Susan said, there was a she broke things down by principal group, so you might want to say, okay, staff that are responsible for completing the questions in Principle 2, they could use the same computer to complete the checklist. So there's no maximum number of people that can complete the checklist. Just know that you have to use the same computer if you're continuing that process. If you're starting anew based on a division within an agency, or perhaps you're a combined agency and the probation division and the secure correctional division want to complete the checklist separately, then you can do that as separate entities from two separate computers. I hope that wasn't confusing and answered your question. If it was confusing, email me and I'll be glad to help you. So this, I guess, concludes today's webinar. After you exit the webinar, a brief survey will appear on the screen. By answering the questions in the survey, you will be helping the Justice Center improve on the services we offer. We greatly appreciate it if you would take a few minutes and complete the survey. We will email a link to the recording of this presentation as well as a link to a PDF of the PowerPoint slides used in the presentation by early next week. These links will also be available on the NRRC Center's website. So thank you again for your participation in the webinar, and I hope that everyone has a great rest of their day. So take care.